Welcome to Chamber Talk. My name's Andrew Gregson, and today our special guest is Marty Burbank, who used to be a chair of the Chamber of Commerce. Welcome, Marty.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Marty is the founder of OC Elder Law. He was also our 103rd chair of the Chamber of Commerce. He's began his career, I believe, was it serving in the Navy, was it?
Yeah, the U.S. Navy.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
How did it all start along,
That's
Marty?
a funner thing to talk about than corporate compliance requirements.
Exactly.
Well, I went in the Navy in 1986 in boot camp, and after a short time, decided to go to volunteer for SEAL training, and I went into SEAL training in the Navy. I ended up going almost all the way through SEAL training. I went through Hell Week and the hardest parts, but I unfortunately broke my leg in third phase towards the end of SEAL training. And although I stuck around for a while, I never really got to where I could be physically strong enough to finish SEAL training. And worked in a hospital for a couple of years, and then went to Navy dive school, became a Navy medical deep sea diver, and was attached to the SEAL teams as a Navy diver.
So, let's dive back into that a little bit, all right? So, because it's so easy, you hear so much about people who, they decided they want to try out to be in the SEAL team, and it's sort of like, oh yeah, I did it, but it's not that at all. No. So you want to share a little bit about, obviously, as an individual, how you have to prepare for because it's not just physical, it's mental too, right?
It really is. In fact, I would say it's mostly mental. I think an average, somebody who was a high school athlete, relatively healthy, physically can make it through SEAL training, because they start you, relatively slow, relatively short distance runs, and they gradually build you up, and you get stronger and stronger and tougher and as you go through it. But the mental game is so much of getting through it. The cold, being able to just withstand the cold. You do some dangerous stuff, but there's so many safety protocols that for the most part, there's very few serious injuries and you're safe, but they really push you to the limits. I remember thinking going in Hell Week that I couldn't walk 10 more feet. And then before you know it, we just ran 5 miles with a boat on our head, and we were still going.
Yeah.
They really train you to realize how much more you can do than you think you can do. And I was talking about this the other day at our veterans group. It's one of the things that has helped so much in my life. Anytime I've had any kind of adversity, anything that's hard that I think is a challenge, I think, how am I going to get through this? I think back to those days and I think, this is a cakewalk.
Yeah.
No worries.
Yeah. I was just about to ask you, do you feel that mental strength that was built up during that time has carried throughout your life? Because I know my training did, and I'm sure it did for that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though I never became a SEAL.
Doesn't matter, you still went for it.
I benefited from that training, and it has made me a stronger, not just physically stronger, but a mentally stronger person than I ever was.
So, you got through that. You decided you wanted to be a deep sea diver, a Navy diver, and then obviously the medical bit. So why diving, and then why deciding you want to put bandages on under the sea?
So I would put bandages on, never under the sea. Well, that's not true. I did it under the sea inside a nuclear submarine.
All right, there you go.
But not underwater. I would do it inside a hyperbaric chamber. If a diver gets injured, or sometimes it's a planned decompression dive where you come up relatively quickly, faster than a civilian diver would, and then you immediately go into a hyperbaric chamber, even if there's no symptoms or anything, and then you go back down and you decompress in the hyperbaric chamber. And so I would be what's called an inside tender. I'd go inside the chamber with the patient or with the diver and take care of them inside the chamber. If they were injured in a dive, then I might do put bandages on them. Right. I might even do minor surgery inside the hyperbaric chamber.
And then they have to go in that because of the carbon monoxide buildup, right? It's something to do with your blood or something, isn't it?
Actually, you might put somebody in there for carbon monoxide, but usually the real issue is decompression sickness. which there's a couple of different types. Some are neurological, some are physical, and that would be the reason to put somebody. When you're in the water, when you're under pressure, the gases, mainly nitrogen, dissolves in your tissues. Mm-hmm. And most people know that as a diver, you come up relatively slowly, and that gives that nitrogen a chance to come out of solution and dissipate safely. But if you come up too fast, or if you hold your breath on the way up, or if you have some kind of blockage, like you went down and you had a cold, and so on your way up, the air wasn't able to escape your lungs because of the mucus in your lungs. Mm-hmm. That trapped air could expand and rupture some alveolus in your lungs and cause air to get into your bloodstream and cause all kinds of problems. Mm-hmm. So any time there was any symptoms like that, my job was mainly to diagnose those problems and then put them in a hyperbaric chamber.
Wow.
So although I was trained as a Navy hard hat diver, a salvage diver, and a combat diver, most of the time I was not in the water. Mm. Most of the time they have to have a diving medic on site,
right,
not in the water.
Right.
So and there weren't very many of us. I think there were 63 of us in the whole Navy.
That's not a lot, is it?
My credentials. And so most of the time I had to be on the surface.
Right.
And so for me to dive, we had to get somebody else to be the medic, and then I could dive.
So then when you were in the chambers, I'm assuming you had to be pressurized and you'd stay down there for, a few days that they stay in there? Or
sometimes, not me though. Saturation divers are a whole different breed of Navy divers, and they might spend a week or even a month under pressure.
Down there, right.
But the longest the longest I was under pressure was 18 hours. That was the longest.
Oh, wow. Well, that's kind of a long time, though, isn't it?
Most of the time it was hours. I mean, like 2 to 6 hours. Even 6 hours is a fairly long time. Most of the time it's probably 2 hours.
So, being that qualified, because obviously medics in any military, they're at a far different standard than maybe you just see in civilian life.
It's true, because I had quite a bit of authority.
Right.
I could write prescriptions. I could do minor surgeries.
It's like mini doctors almost. Right.
And that was as long as I was out in the field.
Yeah.
Once I got into like the Naval Hospital where I worked for a couple of years, then I wasn't much. I could change the bedpans and give bed baths. It was amazing how different my responsibilities and my authority was outside the base, the field, out of the field or in the field.
Well, I mean, you see that in all the movies, don't you? The medic, it's almost a doctor as they're running around out there. So what made you maybe not go into the medical field? Had you had enough, or as you left?
I think primarily it was that C in chemistry that I got in college. I had thought about being a doctor. The military, when I was in, had a really good program for medics, and they were really pushing dive medics and SEAL medics to become physician's assistants. Mm. And so I was really thinking about that. And I had some stressful stuff I was going through, child custody issues and stuff in my chemistry class, and I failed my midterm. Oh. Luckily, I aced the final, but I still ended up with a C in that class. And I was never motivated to go back to it over again. And I just decided, and I was always interested in the law anyway.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's a much shorter path.
Right.
Right. You can, go to college, 3 years in law school, and you're a lawyer, and you can be out there practicing. Doctors, 4 years of undergraduate, 4 years of medical school, residency, internship, fellowship. It's a much longer pipeline and more expensive, and also medical schools are much more selective. I mean, top law schools and top medical schools are selective, but there's no easy medical schools to get into. They're all very selective. There are easy law schools to get into.
Right.
And also, I could go to law school while I was still in the Navy. So I started law school while I was at my last Naval Special Warfare Group 1, my last command. And so I was able to do my first year of law school part-time while I was still in the Navy. And I couldn't have gone to medical school. So
the only thing I ever known about lawyers and the American Navy is JAG. Is that what it?
That's exactly how it is. That show is totally spot on, accurate. Yeah,
running around like that. Look at that. Oh, Tom Cruise learned from you, didn't he?
But I wasn't a JAG in the military.
Right.
So I did work when I was in law school, and I already knew I was getting out of the Navy. I was able to arrange to be temporarily assigned to the JAG command across the bay in San Diego, just to get some more experience. My command let me do that. I found a reservist that was qualified to take my job, and so that reservist came in and took my job so I could go do the work in the JAG officer and get a feel for that. Turned out that reservist wasn't quite as good as we thought he was, so they called me back, and I didn't get to stay there as long as I thought. But it was nice to get a little experience with what the JAGs do. They have a hard job. Most JAGs are not specialized in anything. They're generalists. They have to help the commanding officer when some lower enlisted guy gets a DUI or gets in a fight or goes AWOL, or they call it UA in the Navy. They have to deal with that. They also have to deal with contracts for the command. If they have a construction contract or supplies, they deal in the contracts. They have to deal with, in combat situation, rules of engagement and interpreting the rules of engagement for the command. So they really have a broad thing
spectrum,
to do.
Right.
They're also responsible for the wills for every single deploying military person.
Right.
And that they don't do a very good job on.
Right.
And it's not their fault, but it's just they have so much other stuff to do. They're not specialists in that. And I had a friend who was, there's a book called Lone Survivor, and that was
they made a movie on that, didn't they? Yeah,
Operation Red Wing in 2005. And the first 4 guys went in. I didn't know any of them, but then the second group that came in to try to help them, in the helicopter, a bunch of SEALs and I think it was Air Force flying the helicopter, were shot down with an RPG, and they all died in that accident. And one of my friends was on that helicopter, and he had married 9 months before that deployment, and he had 4 kids from a prior marriage. And because his only counsel was the legalman, not even a lawyer, but the legalman that worked for the JAG officer, and which is kind of like a paralegal, and the payroll clerk. Those were the people counseling, which were both, enlisted guys without college educations.
Right, just learned to trade.
Yeah.
Right.
And they were the ones who counseled him on how to do his power of attorney and his will, and his everybody in the U.S. military has what's called Servicemen's Group Life Insurance, which when I was in was $400,000. I don't know what the current rate is, but a pretty decent chunk of money. And so both of those people that counseled him said, well, just leave it all to your wife. That's kind of the standard thing. But he had those 4 daughters from the prior marriage. And so when he got killed, the all that money went to his new wife, who had her own kids. And none of it made its way to his 4 daughters.
Right.
And that's when I kind of realized, I learned that from
should have had a living trust, isn't it?
Yeah. And people think, because usually when somebody should have a trust, it's usually, especially in California, it's when somebody has real estate. In some states, it's not even then. But in California, it's usually when somebody has real estate. And most people think, well, especially enlisted guys, but even officers in the military, they haven't really accumulated a lot yet, usually.
No.
And so you don't think, they should have a trust.
Yeah.
But they have a $400,000 life insurance policy.
Right. Potential pension.
And they have young children, and they have a young spouse, and a trust would be a very good way to take care of that. We can make sure those young children just don't get that money as soon as they turn 18, or that young wife who very likely, much more than outside in the civilian world, is much more likely to get remarried if their husband is or spouse is
especially
killed.
if you're younger. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're usually very young.
Yeah.
And so it's normal for them to remarry. But once they get remarried, if there's not a plan to protect the children from the prior marriage, those children can really be at a disadvantage.
So do you think, and we'll touch on trusts in a moment, but do you think that sparked your interest in, after finishing law school, to sort of go into the estate planning side of law?
Actually, I was already, when he died, I was already a lawyer.
Oh, wow, okay.
But I was still in touch with, people in the team. He was at the same team I was at. And And it was his sister actually that told me what had happened. I was talking to his sister. And for a while, I tried to identify this problem, and I tried to convince the military to do something about, to make it different, to train JAG officers to do a little bit more, to not just let the legal men and the payroll people
Clerks, right,
be the ones that give them advice. But it was really too much work for the JAG, because it does take some time to do.
Yeah.
And I even got
That's a lot of planning.
It is.
Yeah.
And the tools they don't have the tools. They have tools to do a very simple will and a very simple power of attorney.
Yeah.
And so I worked with actually the company that I use, the software that I use for my estate planning and drafting documents, which I pay, about, I guess, $18,000 a year for a license to use this software.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is the state of the art. It's the best out there for this kind of work. And I got that company. I talked to them, and I convinced them that they should do a free version for the JAG officers.
That's a good idea.
And what I told them was, one, it's a good thing to do,
mm-hmm.
but also those JAG officers, many of them, they're going to do 4 years in the military. They're going to get out and they're going to start in private practice.
Right.
And if they know how to use your software, because that was what they had an opportunity to use in the military,
they're going to buy into it.
Built-in customers.
Yeah.
And they bought that. They're like, yeah, we'll do that.
Yeah.
And but then I could never get the military to I'd talk to somebody, they'd be like, yeah, this is really important.
Yeah.
And then
someone else happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So after you left the Navy, often I know that a lot of people they make it more of a hobby. So did you decide? I know you've got a license to fly an aircraft, which we'll talk about in a moment. But did you decide you want to buy a boat, live on a boat, or you were just done with boats? Or?
Well, I when I lived in Hawaii, I had a boat. I lived on a boat in Hawaii.
Oh wow!
And the first boat I lived on was a really small 25-footer. I was a lower enlisted guy. I didn't have much money, and I couldn't even have a dock. I had a mooring ball.
Oh right. Well, you got to swim in on a little dinghy, right?
And I didn't have a dinghy.
Oh, so you're just swimming in the morning?
It's Hawaii, so it was warm all year round, and I would swim out there.
Make your flotation pack in the morning.
Luckily, at my command, we had lockers and stuff,
good.
So I could have clothes and stuff at the command.
Right.
And I would swim back and forth, and after about 6 months, I ended up getting a dock, and I didn't have to swim anymore. And then I eventually got a little bit bigger boat. I had a 33-footer, which is still a pretty small boat, and lived on that the rest of the time that I was in Hawaii. And then when I got orders back to San Diego, me and a friend sailed that boat from Hawaii to San Diego.
Oh, wow.
And that was a pretty cool trip.
Was that your first major sort of trip on your own?
It was the
journey,
longest. I've been sailing most of my life. I raced pretty competitively when I was young. I learned how to sail really in the Sea Scouts, although my dad had a friend with a boat, and we'd go out on boats since I was 3. But I didn't really learn to sail until I was in the Sea Scouts when I was about 14, 15.
Right.
And then I got a job with North Sails, which is the largest sail maker in the world. And there I worked with 2 America's Cup sailors, 2 Olympians, the same 2 guys. They were both Olympians, and other world-class sailors. And with them had opportunities to race with other Olympians and America's Cup sailors. And those guys really taught me how to race. And so I was fairly young, and I was racing at a pretty competitive level. And mostly I was doing distance racing, the longest trips at that, probably maybe a week long. We'd race
that's quite well.
A lot of Mexican races. But the first Hawaii trip was my first really long trip.
Right.
That boat was small and slow. It wasn't a fast boat like the race boats that I would race on. But it took us 28 days to get from Hawaii.
That's a fair amount of time, isn't it?
Yeah,
in the middle of the sea.
Our first stop was Catalina Island, right off the coast here, right? And so often I'll talk to people that aren't sailors, and we'll talk about sailing or something. They're like, you ever sailed to Catalina? I'm like, oh, yeah. And they're like, well, how long does it take to get out there? And I to Catalina. And I go, well, one trip it took me 28 days to get to Catalina. The question is, where did you start from?
Right.
If you start from Hawaii, it might take you 28 days.
Oh, that's really cool. So you said that as you were you'd already sort of started your own practice, and you know, obviously the founder of OC Elder Law. Is that you went straight into that, or did you work for someone first? What happened when you started as an attorney?
I pretty much started my practice once I got licensed. While I was waiting for my bar results, I did clerk for a couple that had a small estate planning firm.
Right. So you went straight into.
I went straight into my own practice. Once I got
real
licensed,
entrepreneur.
Yeah, the day after I got my license, I had my first client, and it's interesting. Today, actually, I was supposed to go be the witness for a signing of an estate plan, and that lady gave me my very first referral 20-something years ago.
Wow.
She was actually my mom was on hospice, and she was my mom's hospice social worker. Wow. And she knew I was waiting for my bar results, and the bar results came in, I got licensed, and she'd already given me a referral. The next day, I was seeing one of her other hospice clients.
That's awesome.
And actually today I was supposed to go be one of the witnesses. When we notarize documents, somebody has to have a valid ID, and now she's much older and in a nursing home, and she doesn't have a valid ID.
Sure.
So normally I can't be a witness because I haven't known the person. You know, most clients I haven't known 20 years, but I've known her for over 20 years. So
Right.
I was going to be able to go validate who she was, but we couldn't get a notary to come out today. So I just thought it's kind of interesting that you brought that up, and I'm working with that same lady right now.
That's the way the world works, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's just strange, isn't it? I'm sorry that you were unable to meet that lady today, but on the other hand, you know, that's why we're doing this today. You're sharing it with the rest of the world. So I quickly threw in there that it's a very entrepreneurial thing to do, but that is a very bold move. What made you decide, like the day before even, right? I'm opening my own practice. I'm going out on my own.
Yeah, in hindsight, I wonder how wise that was, but I know I grew up, my dad was very entrepreneurial. He was never a real successful businessman, but he was always entrepreneurial. He was always starting new business. He always worked really hard. So also I was older because of my military career. I was almost 38 when I finished law school. Mm-hmm. And a 38-year-old with a brand new law degree is not employable, really.
Yeah.
So it was partly out of necessity that I had to start my own practice. But, I know, because I've worked with a lot of young lawyers, when you come out of law school, you really don't know anything.
No.
And I've learned so much in the last 20 years. In fact, if I have somebody come in and they were a client of mine 19 years ago or, even 15 years ago, I'm like, I'm so glad they came in so I could fix whatever I did wrong, I'm always afraid I'm going to get that call and have to call my malpractice carrier. Knock on wood, I've never had to get sued for malpractice.
But to be fair, the law changes so much, and every so many years, so many things do change that you would have to renew or change or mend things anyway. So we're not going to let the listeners think that you're a bad attorney. We do want to just make a note there that obviously, there are a lot of law changes that mean that trusts and things have to be amended anyway.
And that's a good point. And that's actually kind of brings up why I wasn't able to do this a couple of weeks ago when we were going to do it, was good lawyers are doing a lot of continuing education. It's constant. And I spend a lot of time and money and energy staying on top of the law. I was just at Heckerling in Florida, which is the largest estate planning conference, estate and tax planning conference in the country, and it happens every year in January in Florida. There's another one. I'll be next month at another big conference for special needs because we do special needs planning also, and that's in Napa. That happens every year. There's the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, which is another conference that this year I think is going to be in Boston. I'll be at that. To go to these really good high-quality conferences does take a lot of time and energy away from my practice, and they're not inexpensive.
I was going to say, but you got to pay for them too, right?
It's about probably $13,000 for me to go to Heckerling all in, not counting the revenue I didn't generate, the opportunity costs because I was gone. But that's what it really takes to stay on top of everything. I also have and one of the reasons I was able to start my law practice with a fair amount of confidence right out of law school was I immediately pursued an advanced degree in tax law. And I did that locally through Chapman University's law school. It's called an LLM, a postdoctorate degree in tax law. And I was a brand new lawyer, and I had these clients, but my classmates were all practicing lawyers. One of them had been practicing for over 20 years at that point, and he was just pursuing his advanced degree in tax law. So I had a class, a bunch of classmates who were all lawyers that I could run ideas through. I had access to the full law library, which I couldn't have afforded when I was starting my practice to use the law. I had all the research tools available from the law school, and I had access to the faculty of the postdoctorate tax program lawyers all to help me if I had questions about anything. And that gave me a great deal of confidence to be able to have all those resources in, so there wasn't anything that, and I was never afraid to say, and I'm still not afraid to say, I don't know.
Right.
And I think most people respect that more than and people can tell if you're making stuff up.
Yeah.
And so I would often say, and I still say this, but then even more, but I would say, I don't know, but I'll find out. And I'd go ask my professor, I'd ask some of my classmates, and that was always helpful. I also, two things that were really important, there were, I knew I wanted to do elder law and estate planning, and so I sought out the two best attorneys in Orange County in those fields. The best estate planning attorney that people would tell me about was a guy named David Allen Brown. And the best elder law attorney was Faye Blix. And I sought those two out right away, and I met them, and I said, I'm Marty, I'm a brand new lawyer. Can you be a resource for me? Can you mentor me? And they both said, yeah, absolutely. And David has retired now, but Faye Blix is still an attorney, and both of them always answered questions for me, and both of them still gave me referrals because, like, David's practice does a lot of estate tax planning stuff, which I do, but he doesn't do any elder law. Faye Blix does a lot of elder law, but doesn't do any tax stuff or veteran stuff. And so she gives me referrals, and David always gave me referrals for elder law stuff. But they also taught me a lot of things, and not just about the law, but practical things about running my business. And I'm especially appreciative to Faye Blix because she really taught me the importance of, she said, you've got to stay current on the law. That's just a given.
Right.
But to be a good elder law attorney, you really need to spend quite a bit of time learning about other issues related to seniors. So she told me and recommended, and I did it, go through ombudsman training, so nursing home ombudsman training, and I got certified to be an ombudsman. And I think that was one of the most beneficial things because I know a lot more about
what goes on,
all the resources available for a senior that if I just studied the law, I wouldn't know those things.
Right.
And actually the things that most of my clients, when we're talking about elder law stuff, they're more grateful for the non-legal stuff that I told them about.
Right.
The resources that I shared with them that aren't legal resources, but help them with their care. The wisdom about communicating with a parent. That's not a legal thing, but it's how can we preserve family harmony? How can we, make sure you're not offending your parent or treating your parent poorly or respecting your parent and giving them dignity. And a lot of times people don't think that. They're not thinking about those things.
Yeah.
When they are dealing with needing to take dad's keys away or something like that. There's ways to do it with dignity and there's not. So I help with clients with a lot of those things.
There was one thing that sparked my mind then that you don't often think about with an attorney, and especially in your field, is that, there's an amount of responsibility and accountability because whether you are looking something up or not, you're still, giving somebody legal advice, and they are probably going to utilize that in their daily life. Does that carry any weight of stress to you, or did it at the beginning? Because it's something we don't really think about with attorneys. Like, there's a second part of it, isn't there?
Sometimes I have situations where sometimes I feel like I didn't do a good enough job persuading a client to take a particular path or to do something. And I think I'm a good lawyer, but I'm not a great salesperson. I'm not very pushy. I'm not the guy that's going to have somebody in my conference room and really try to make them feel uncomfortable leaving if they don't sign a deal with me today. Mm-hmm. I'd much rather them not sign anything and come back later when they're ready. But sometimes clients, and all lawyers are expensive, and so sometimes people don't want to spend the money, but I can see that there really is a very significant return on investment if they take a particular path. Mm-hmm. And I really want them to do it, but I don't want to push them to do it and feel like I've pushed them to do something they didn't really want to do. But I know if they do it, it's going to make a big impact in their family or them. Mm-hmm. And so that is kind of frustrating. I have a client right now that is dealing with a pretty horrible situation, and I don't want to talk about the details of their case too much, but they're very focused on one problem.
Right.
And it is an important problem. But in the whole scheme of the legal issues and the tax issues, it's a relatively minor problem. But that's got all their attention right now. Mm-hmm. And we can't address these other issues in her mind until this is fixed. Yeah. And unfortunately, the other issues are much, much bigger and are going to cost the family a lot more money. And it's going to take time. It's going to take a few months. And she wants to deal with this one issue right now. Yeah. But these other issues that are going to take at least a few months to get evaluation and do some other stuff and really do a thoughtful plan are important to do. Yeah. And a couple things. One, I don't want her to skip doing that. But I'm also worried if I don't address those other issues and we do this other thing without taking those other things into consideration,
it's going to be a larger problem.
I might be in trouble for malpractice because there's issues that I didn't get enough time to spend and really analyze to give her good advice and feedback on because we were so rushed on this one thing that it's important, but in the whole scheme of things is relatively minor.
Yeah, no, it's we put that down to human nature, don't we?
Yeah.
That's what that does. Yeah. That's what that does. So a little bit earlier there, you were talking about being responsible as an attorney, and that you do all this different training, and you've recently been down to heckling. And when we were first talking about this, I remember asking if you knew anything about that new CTA law that was coming out, the Corporate Transparency Act, and you said, "Well, that's what I'm going to do this training for." And I thought,
was part of it.
And I thought,
in fact, that was where I first heard about it last year.
Okay.
And it was really brand new then, and it didn't come into effect until January of this year. But it was last January of 2023 that I first heard about it at Heckling.
So, why this came above our thing is obviously with the Chamber of Commerce, so we're looking out for things like this. But all over social media, you've got all these different people giving all this information. And I just thought to myself, well, who better to share on our podcast than a past chair, somebody who's also a member of the Chamber and obviously knows more about it. So, Marty, why don't you share a little bit about what this CTA means to us regular folk who don't really know all the ins and outs of things, and what are we supposed to do about it?
There is a lot of hype about it, and there's some people that think it's overwhelming, and there's a $500 a day fine, up to $10,000, even criminal penalties. And so there are people that maybe are charging people to be compliant, but are kind of, like a lot of things, scaring people into worrying about it so that they can get retainers to deal with it.
Right.
It's really not that complicated. It may make sense if you're busy, especially to have an attorney or a CPA take care of the compliance for you. But if you're the kind of person that does it yourself, you could probably handle most of it yourself. But it's a requirement. It wasn't even so much like, the Congress just did this. It was more a product of international relationships with other countries and treaties and agreements to help deal with money laundering and drug trafficking, and that's really where this came from. It didn't start with the U.S. We're doing it to be compliant with the other countries that we
do trade with.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So, but it passed, I think it was 2019, and it just went into effect in
January, didn't it? Right.
And what it is anybody, and there's more like a lot of things in the law, there's more exceptions to the rule than the rule. But I think there's 30 or 23 excluded entities. But for most small businesses, if they were formed by a Secretary of State in one of the 50 states, territories, or Indian tribes, then if it was formed with the Secretary of State or an office similar to the Secretary of State, you have to file a report, beneficial ownership report, to the Department of Treasury, and there's a special website, and you have to do it. The company has to do it, and you have to list the information for all of the beneficial owners of the entity.
So
and that's really the new thing.
So is this similar to whether you have an LLC or a corp or whatever? Every so often you have to fill in the details, who's still the owner and things like that. It's just another process like that, is it?
It's similar to that, but it's more.
Okay.
And it varies from state to state as far as the requirements when you're filing that annual filing for the LLC. Some states, Nevada, Wyoming, Delaware, you don't have to put the specific owner in the state filings. And a lot of people like that because of the anonymity.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what this law is, to get it.
To get that information out of you.
It doesn't become a public record, though.
Okay.
When you do your filing at the Secretary of State's office, that is a public record. Mm-hmm. But when if your LLC is owned in one or is formed in one of those states that doesn't require that, then that information is not out there. But even if it's formed in California, which requires that the owner or the manager, at least, and a manager of an LLC is not like the manager of your store; it's more like a president of a corporation. The manager or the president, that information has to be filed with the Secretary of State. The officers, the secretary, the vice president, the treasurer, those need to be registered with the Secretary of State. But all the shareholders aren't listed with the Secretary of State. Right. And with this new law, the shareholders do have to be registered, but it's not a public record.
Right.
And it's not all shareholders. It's only shareholders that have a 25% interest or more.
Monetarily.
Value of the company, mm-hmm. or that have significant control.
Right.
So they may not even be an owner at all, mm-hmm. but they might be the trustee of a trust that owns the LLC.
Right.
They might be the member manager, but not a member. I'm sorry, they might be the manager, but not a member. You
right.
could be a member
manager of the trust,
or
right?
Just a manager of the LLC. Mm-hmm. Or they could be you can be the president of the corporation and not be a shareholder. Mm-hmm. That person would also be required to report beneficial ownership.
And there's this stuff found, basically, if you go online, you can download the form, fill it out,
send
it in. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Of it?
And the government website is fincen.gov, fincen.gov.
Oh, there you go.
And like I say, if you're a do-it-yourselfer, if you're really good at keeping up your corporate minutes in your corporate book every year,
you're gonna be all right.
Which like 60% of small businesses aren't. But if you are the one that's good at doing that and your minutes are up to date, you'll probably be able to handle this fine.
Right.
If when your accountant says it's time to do the taxes, you have everything ready and you go, here you go,
yeah.
You'll probably be able to do this yourself.
Yeah.
If you're always filing for an extension and you haven't done any minutes since you formed your company in 1999, then probably you should let somebody else do it for you.
And is this something you have to do is there a specific month you have to get it done by? Or?
There is. If you formed your entity before January 1st of this year,
okay,
you have by the end of this year to do it.
Okay.
But if you formed your entity this year, you have to do it within 90 days of forming the entity.
Oh, wow. Okay.
For the beneficial owners, you have to provide, and this is where it's a little bit burdensome, but not overwhelming. You have to provide their home address, mm-hmm. not their business address, not a P.O. box. It has to be their home address. A copy of their photo ID, passport, driver's license. You have to phone number, their driver's license number or passport number or social security number. It can be any one of those. Provide all that. And so for each entity, each beneficial owner, you have to submit all that stuff.
All right. So if you own several one company, but it's several LLCs. You're going to do several times this form, right?
Yeah. Now there are exceptions. Like I mentioned, there was 23 exceptions. Banks don't have to do this. Basically, think of, businesses where there's already significant compliance requirements. So banks already have significant. Publicly traded companies already have significant requirements. Broker dealers, those kinds of institutions and businesses don't have to. They're exempt from this because they're already compliant. None of them are doing money laundering. So this law is not targeted to them.
Right. And do you think this is something that if somebody's unable to do it themselves, they ask maybe their accountant or their local attorney? Or
Yeah, I think an accountant, attorney, even a good bookkeeper or an enrolled agent could probably do it if they once they learned how to do it. The learning curve is pretty quick. The thing that maybe gets missed potentially is listing the business, listing the primary owners seems kind of common sense. But if you have a trust, especially an irrevocable trust, and your kids are the beneficiaries of that trust, and that trust owns your LLC, your kids are now
on the
beneficial owners. So you have to report your children, and they might be minors. And maybe they don't have a driver's license. I don't know what you do in that point. But,
right. Yeah, that's true.
You have to list all that information. I guess Social Security numbers probably, but I don't know what you have to have an ID.
Well, you said that Social
had that problem
Security
yet.
number. Well, I mean, and we'll get off this topic in a moment. But I was just thinking then, as you're mentioning it, I remember when people do advanced estate planning, often what they're looking at is, they'll have somebody who's managing the LLC. Everything's in a trust, right? So they're getting further and further away from being the physical owner, even though they are. This sort of cuts straight through that red tape a little bit, doesn't it?
At least as far as reporting purposes. But it doesn't.
It doesn't stop the other bits. It just gives you a name and address of somebody.
And theoretically, because it's not a public record, if you still want to be, keep your name private so that if you get sued by somebody, they can't just look up. Nobody's going to be able to say, "Oh, Andrew had a car accident. Let's see what he owns," and go to the Treasury and see what he owns.
Right.
It's not going to be available for that.
Right.
There's police departments, FBI, government
officials and stuff. Right.
The one thing that's interesting is foreign governments can have access to it. So if Interpol or a law enforcement in London, in England, is trying to investigate international crime, between Great Britain and the United States, they would have access to it.
All right.
So there's some people concerned about the vulnerability because their things get hacked.
Right.
So that is a realistic concern.
Yeah.
But the plan is, and it has high level of security.
Of course.
But it's never going to become a public record.
Right. All right. So thank you for that information. I'm glad you actually went. It's a weird name, isn't it? Heckling.
It's named after a law professor at Miami.
But I was just immediately thinking jokes and attorneys and heckling. It just wasn't really going, it wasn't really working that way. But thank you for sharing that information. It's valuable to listeners, especially if you own a business, because it's a brand new law and thing we have to follow. So that's really good. So moving on into your own practice, a lot of the things you do are living trusts. And you mentioned something before about when you were talking about the JAG not being able to really help the military with what they needed to do, and the guy had a new wife and kids and all the rest of it. I remember some time ago I was learning about a story where it was about a firefighter actually. He'd been married, got divorced, as people do sometimes, and then he'd been with his current wife for a good 20 years or what have you, and then he passed away, but he forgot to amend his trust,
I know where this is going.
So his first wife received his full pension and all the other bits and pieces, and of course, yes, you can go and contest it, but hey, You know, it's down there. It's very difficult to do that. So you want to walk us through a little bit about that world and why somebody should maybe look at getting a living trust, or, you know, the not the pitfalls, but the benefits to it.
This is where it really is important to talk to an attorney, because there's a lot of misinformation. Somebody heard something and they remember part of what they remember from a meeting that they had or what they heard, and they'll say, oh yeah, well, you know, when you get a divorce, your estate plan is void, so you don't have to worry, it's not going to go to your ex-wife. Well, that's partially true. If you left in your will or your trust, you know, my wife gets
divorced.
Well, even if you didn't cover that, but even if, you know, because most people, when they set up their estate plan, they're not planning to get divorced.
No.
But if you did leave something to your wife in your will or your trust, or you appointed them to be your executor, that is void. When you die, or I'm sorry, when you get divorced, that is void. But if you named your wife as a beneficiary of your bank account, your life insurance, your retirement account, that's not void.
Right.
And even if you get divorced and remarried and do a whole new trust and say, I leave everything to my new wife.
Or husband.
Right. Yeah. Those beneficiary designations, thanks for calling me out on that.
No worries.
Those beneficiary designations trump the will, they trump the trust. In fact, I had a client today, I was asking me that same question. There was a trust in this case that said everything went to one daughter. Mm. But the actual account, actually the trust said this bank account at ABC Bank went to the daughter. But the account at ABC Bank had brother and sister equal on it. Mm-hmm. That's what trumps. Mm-hmm. So the brother got to keep his half. Mm-hmm. And didn't have to give that extra half to a sister, because the beneficiary designation at the financial institution trumps the will, right, or trumps the trust.
Right. And so, you know, in today's world, because things aren't as quite the same as before, right? I mean, now we've got legal domestic partnerships, and folks live together for years and don't get married at all. A lot of people aren't even buying homes. What still are those benefits? Because there are benefits of a trust. Well, what are they?
Yeah, there's benefits of a trust, and there's also sometimes, especially in California, benefits of getting married, even if it's at the last minute, because of taxes. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you see families, especially before gay couples were able to get married. It's gotten a lot easier than it used to be. But if somebody, they're cohabitating for years, living together, and they're not married, and one of them goes to the hospital and they don't have any legal documentation in place, they don't have any rights to discuss the health care of their loved one. Oof. And sometimes there'll be estranged kids. Maybe the kids don't like dad's new girlfriend, right, that have been living basically as husband and wife, but they never got married. Right. And they're jealous of her because she's not their mom, whatever reason. Right. And they're estranged from dad. But now dad's in the hospital. His wife, or, you know, not wife, but, you know,
living partner right,
for the last 20 years.
Can't make any decisions.
And the estranged kids are in control of dad's health care.
They're going to turn that switch off.
And they can prevent her from seeing her
oh, wow.
partner. And it's horrible. So, yeah. And that's an easy thing to fix, that healthcare one especially. Mm-hmm. You don't need we do it as part of an estate planning package for people. We include that. But you don't need a lawyer to draft that. You can download a form online and prepare the advanced healthcare directive and name the person you want to be your healthcare power of attorney. Mm-hmm. Most healthcare businesses or hospitals, mm-hmm, they'll give you a form for free. Right. The California Medical Association has one online. I think you can get for $3. And those are all good. Now, I wouldn't say the same thing about financial powers of attorney or trusts. You need a lawyer, a lawyer who understands, especially if we're dealing with seniors, you need an elder law attorney. But if we're not dealing with seniors, you'll probably be fine with an estate planning attorney. But you want an attorney that focuses on estate planning or elder law and has a good tax understanding. You don't want the guy who, he does wills, he does business formation, he does divorces, and you don't want a jack of all trades.
Right.
There really are nuances to the law, and especially the tax law, that really make a big difference. If you're married, for example, and you have a spouse, obviously if you're married, you have a spouse, and when you die, your spouse gets a couple of really good tax benefits. One is any asset that you own, including your house or your stock portfolio, if it's gone up in value, if you'd have sold it, you'd have to pay capital gains tax on it.
Right.
The day after you die, your wife can sell those same assets with no capital gains tax.
Oh.
But if you're not married, if you just have a partner, they don't get that benefit.
No.
And in California, if you own the house and you have it in a trust and you give it to your partner when you die, it immediately gets reassessed and your property taxes go way up.
Yeah.
You bought it 20 years ago for $500,000 and now
Right.
it's worth $1.5 million.
Right.
Your property taxes are going to jump from $5,000 a year to $15,000 a year.
Yeah.
Just like that. But if it was going to your spouse, you wouldn't have to. It would stay the same.
Yeah.
The property taxes would stay the same.
Because it remains in the same owner level.
Yeah.
Right.
So those are two huge things that people sometimes don't know about or consider, and they're living. And sometimes there's really good reasons to not get married. Sometimes people, are already widowed, and they're getting their spouse's pension, or they're getting, their spouse had a higher Social Security rate than they would have got. So it makes sense to not remarry and lose those benefits.
Sure.
Or maybe veterans benefits from a widow of a soldier. They get those benefits and they would lose those if they got married. So they'll hold themselves out as married, but they won't actually get married.
Right.
And that sounds all good for those reasons, but then the capital gains tax hits, the property tax hits, those can be huge. And so sometimes we get married at the last minute. We'll stay unmarried for a long time. And then we're like, okay, we're calling hospice and the pastor to read last rites, but marry them quick first before that happens.
And that still holds out?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. The marriage does, yeah.
So on another note, because it seems to be more apparent these days, what about parents, married or not, who have kids with special abilities or disabilities, should I say?
Yeah.
Whether it's special, I know they call it special needs
Special
trust
needs
or something, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's planning, isn't it? You got to plan ahead just in case something happens to you, right?
Yes. There are some. I just want to back up a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
There are some benefits, specifically veterans benefits, where you have to be married at least a year.
All right. Okay. All right.
But some of them depends on what the benefit is. The property tax and the step up in basis, that can happen pretty quickly. But yeah, special needs planning is something that is very important, and it's another place where there's a lot of misinformation. I've seen a lot of estate plans that eliminated a special needs child because that's what they were told. Don't leave anything to that special needs child. If you leave them something, they're going to lose their benefits, their public benefits. Don't leave them anything at all. And that's what a lot of people believe, and they don't leave anything to that special needs child.
Right.
Sometimes they'll leave it to the sibling of that special needs child. There's a boy and a girl. The boy has some special needs, so we leave everything to the daughter and assume she's going to take care of her brother. And she may be really good at taking care of her brother, but what if she dies first?
Yeah, well, she goes down to the dealership and buys a Ferrari.
Yeah. So if she's trustworthy, great. But if she dies first, it doesn't matter.
Right.
But if she's not trustworthy,
right,
and she goes and blows the money, or she has a spouse that blows the money.
That's true.
And that we see quite often, that there'll be a spouse who will justify, and they'll put it in their mind. And it's not always the spouse, sometimes it's the sibling, but they will justify it. And I've seen it so many times. Well, and sometimes it's for the parent and sometimes it's for the disabled child. My brother has special needs, and we want to take care of him. We have our own home, and there's this money in this trust, but we feel like he'd do much better if he was in our house, and our house was in Newport Beach, and so we should buy a house. Of course, we'll buy it in our name, right. And they'll use the special needs kids' money to buy a house so that there's a better home, but they obviously profit from it. And I see kids do that with, let's sell mom's house so we can get a bigger house to take care of mom.
Right.
Well, it's also in Newport Beach in a nicer neighborhood, and guess who gets to benefit from that house is the kids, and the other kids lose out. It's not as big a problem if it's an only child, but when it's when there's other beneficiaries, it creates quite a mess.
Well, there's another part to that, though. I was just thinking whether you had special needs trusts or not. Is the spouse you could get divorced, so it's half mine.
Yeah, exactly. So if we leave the funds to the neurotypical sibling,
right,
and now those funds are in that kid's name, and then that kid gets divorced and commingled. Theoretically, at least initially, they're separate property assets, but they can become commingled and be a problem, and that's what divorce attorneys make a lot of money fighting over.
Right.
And
so can you prevent that? There's like provisions you can do to help prevent
absolutely.
that?
Yeah, so I kind of got off topic, but
it's all right. Here to help you come back on.
Thank you. You're doing a good job. Attorneys can create a special needs trust, sometimes called a supplemental needs trust, for that child with the disabilities,
right?
And that way, that child can still get public benefits, but they won't count that money in the special needs trust for them. But those funds are available to help pay for things that public benefits don't pay for.
Right.
Travel, education, extra therapy. Really improving the quality of life for that child, and it's much better than cutting that child out. And then we can name a remainder beneficiary after that child. So maybe it does end up going back to the sister. If that disabled child dies with no heirs, then it would go to his sister. Or maybe a lot of people will set it up to go to a charity. When my son with a developmental disability dies, the United Cerebral Palsy could be the charity.
So basically, they could give, the child passed away, let's say, that the benefit for that child, and then the money that's still left in that pot, within the trust, it could have said, now it goes to this other charity.
Right. It could go to the siblings, it could go to charity, it could go to other grandchildren, or wherever you want it to go. Now, there's really a couple of different kinds of special needs trusts. So that's generally referred to as a special needs or supplemental needs trust. And that is what's called a third-party special needs trust. So somebody set that up for the disabled child.
Right.
Usually it's a parent, could be a grandparent. There's also what's called a self-settled special needs trust, which is when there wasn't any prior planning and all of a sudden that disabled child has some windfall. Maybe grandparent died and left him some money. Maybe there was an accident, a car accident, and they were the victim of the accident, and there was a lawsuit, and there's a judgment, and they get that. So they have this windfall of funds, but it's not in a special need trust. So now they immediately lose all their public benefits. So then you can put those funds in what's called a self-settled. They set up their own special needs trust. But that trust, it'll keep their assets in the trust so that they're not counted for public benefits purposes, but when they pass away. So with the self-settled special needs trust, when somebody gets that windfall and they have to set up the special needs trust themselves, they'll still qualify for the public benefits and protect those assets. Mm-hmm. But when they pass away, they don't get to go to the charity of their choice. They don't get to go to the other siblings. They go to the government, basically.
Oh. Why would somebody do that?
Because that's the only option.
Oh.
Because if they don't do that, then they lose their public benefits because they have
I see what you're saying. Right,
so they can do that, and then they'll still qualify for the public benefits, and theoretically they'll try to spend all that money on the extra things.
Right.
They'll buy extra therapy, travel, a TV, a computer, things that aren't covered by public benefits.
Right.
A car even, they can use those funds for that. So they have it, and then, by the time they get close to dying, they've spent it all, and then there's really nothing left over.
I see what you're saying.
But the D4A trust is an option. You have to be under 65 for that to be able to be used. But those are really the two kind of special needs trusts. One that somebody else sets up for you, which is really the much better one, or the D4A I call it D4A. That's the code provision, or the first party or self-settled special needs trust.
Right. So I'd like to make a joke here and say that's very interesting, Marty. Thank you very much. But it is interesting.
Once
stuff.
I start talking about code sections, you're like, okay, let's move on.
Yeah, let's move along now. It sounds like I'm interviewing a politician again. But no, on a serious note, though, I think it's very important that people at least know what tools they have to offer to protect themselves, because we're all about business, and part of business is protecting yourself. So, if you're starting your own business, you may have borrowed some money from the bank, you may have a home, and then you've got it in harm's way. So looking and going to an estate planning attorney and talking about this type of thing is crucial, because you can lose it quicker than you really, really believe. And if you're, crap, what do I do now? It's too late. So I do appreciate you sharing all that, and so I was just joking then about pretending it was a bit thingy. So one of the things that you were the 103rd. Were you president or chair? What did they change the name then?
We were called the chair of the board.
You were chair of the board. Okay. So because I know before it was president and then it changed, so chair of board. Okay. So you're the 103rd back in 2017. Now, what's more interesting is a couple of weeks ago I interviewed retired Senator Dick Ackerman, and that's how he basically started his political career. He joined the chamber, became on the board, became the president, they called it back then. Then he went on to city council and so on and so forth. The rest is history. So what first got you involved with the Chamber of Commerce?
For me, I think it was a way to grow my business. I just started my law practice, and it was a way to market, especially in those days. That was how we got most of our business, was going to chamber mixers and functions and meeting other people in the community. And it was a way to grow my business. And it's interesting because I got into politics, I guess backwards from Ackerman. Mm-hmm. Was I got involved with the chamber, and then I started learning more about the political goings on, and decided I wanted to jump into that. But I mainly joined to grow my business and learn more about business. There was always learning opportunities at the chamber that were very helpful in getting started.
And what would you say to those members today, that jump that one makes from being a member, participating, sometimes not participating because it's up to them, right? There's no forceful on it. What's the jump that made you decide, I'll go for the board? Because you got to apply to be on the board of directors.
Yeah, I was asked by the first time I was on the board, Joyce Capel, who was the chair back then.
Chair, right?
And she's been a chair again, wasn't she? A chair?
I think she was chair twice.
Very smart lady, one of the smartest people I know. And she asked me to serve, and I was honored to serve. But like a lot of organizations, whether it's Rotary, other service clubs, I'm a member of a group called the Roosters. What you get out of an organization really is a direct reflection of what you put into it. Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of people are trying to grow their business, especially young entrepreneurs or young business people. Maybe they're real estate agents or insurance guys or whatever business they're trying to do and promote. They join an organization like Rotary or the Chamber, but they don't do much. They pay their dues, and they expect that
magic happens.
Magical happens. My phone will start ringing because I joined the chamber.
Right.
But and that usually doesn't happen, and then a year later they're like, well, I got nothing out of that, so mm-hmm. they drop out. Mm-hmm. But if you join and you serve on a committee, you volunteer to greet people, do name tags, show up at every event, mentor somebody else, ask to have a mentor, and get connected, then you're going to get a lot more out of the organization. And I feel like because I was active in the chamber, that really helped my business grow. Not only did it help my business grow, but it helped me be more knowledgeable about business in general. Mm. I learned a lot because I don't have an MBA. I don't have a business degree. Mm. I have a law degree. I have a postdoctorate degree in tax law, but my undergrad was basically sociology. So, none of those things really help you run a business.
Right.
But I've learned from some of the the business people in the chamber, either people with MBAs or just people that have run their own business and been entrepreneurial. I've learned so much from them. They've helped me run my business better. So both the chamber and Rotary, I've had those experiences where I've met some really smart entrepreneurs that really taught me a lot about business. So not only did my business grow, but I became a better businessman because of the chamber.
And we see that, like you're working within the chamber, you see that, because you're like a helicopter looking above, right? Is you can see that everyone has at one stage had a very similar challenge. And somebody who's new might learn from somebody who learned that years ago. And it doesn't matter the size of business either. They could be running a multi-million-dollar business today, but they all started somewhere, and the challenges and the things that you face, they are very similar. It just means usually more money, doesn't it? That's really
it's
the
a matter of scale.
It is. It really is a matter of scale. So once going on the board, obviously, then becoming the chair of a chamber. Well, that's a bit of a responsibility. Well, at least for a good year and a bit. Well, 2 years, because then you do past chair too.
Yes. It's about a 3-year commitment.
It is,
because you serve as the VP.
VP first, right? That's right. Yeah.
And then chair, and then the immediate past chair. So yeah, it is a commitment, and it was work. But the chamber helps the staff of the chamber. Your predecessor helped. The staff that was there at the time helped, and the other chair members all helped. Pretty much everybody is there to make sure you don't fail, but also, you have some great minds brainstorming and coming with ideas, and sometimes bad ideas. There's things that we did back then that, with hindsight, I would say, well, that was a dumb idea. This facility that we have now, I was always resistant to having a city subsidized office because I didn't want the chamber to be beholden to the city.
Right.
But this is a beautiful facility. It's not 100% subsidized, but I really think it's the right move for the chamber.
Yeah.
And it's something that I would have been resistant to
some time ago.
10 years ago. But now I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. And it really is helping the chamber have a better facility to do so much more, to help so many more people. So the chamber was much more politically active, I think, in those days. Wrongly so, I think. I think it's better for the chamber to really be a lot more neutral and just really focus on helping businesses.
Well, that's the way we're trying to go, is just to make sure that everybody's aware of everything that's going on, and we've got to work with everyone. I think that's the difference. It's like business, right? We're almost having to showcase how to do better business. It's and by doing so, you got to be able to work with anyone and everyone in order to get to wherever we're all supposed to go. One thing that we've discussed in the past, which I'd love to share on here, because wasn't it during your time, it was like the first time you ever had the She event?
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely, yeah.
It has become quite a thing now.
Yeah, I remember Libby Adams was the first keynote speaker, the founder of Altrex.
Oh, wow.
She was pretty amazing. Started that company basically in a cubicle, like the cubicles you have here, with two other partners, and then they took it public, and it's a huge public. Her partner was in Forbes magazine a couple years ago as the newest billionaire.
Wow.
And really very philanthropic. I have a lot of respect for her and what she does with her philanthropy. So what could you share with us, like the thought process? Because, as a board, it's not sort of like we invented something, because you really did, of creating something like the She event. It's not the easiest thing to do. It was quite forward thinking back then. I'd really like to say it was all my idea, and I did all the work,
course,
and recruited all the
chair.
speakers and organized the catering and everything. But it was brought to us. Somebody had the idea, and they brought it to the board and said, this is something we could do. And it totally made sense. And I was very excited to be a part of it and be the chair that year that it was kicked off. I was one of the only 2 men that were there at the event. My wife was there, but it was a really good event, and I'm really proud that that's something that the chamber does, and I'm proud to see that it's still going on and getting better every year. Yeah,
it's getting a lot stronger. We had a great turnout last October, and we added to the idea, as now we have the very beginning, people can showcase their business. So it's like almost like a little bit of a mini trade show. So members are able to showcase, their business to the people who are coming in to be that audience. So it's turned out to be really good.
That's a great way to leverage that event.
Well, it's half. And then we were being very clever. We stole an idea from IKEA, where you have to walk through the whole of IKEA to get to the other end. And so what we do is we guide everyone through the little trade show bit, really, before you actually go into the room. But it's only the right thing to do because, folks are there you want to help people, inspire them to be better in business and like-minded and collaborate. So what other better thing to do it? But it's not really a trick. It's just a way of actually building up, what people really need. So there you go. So another thing, moving along from the chamber, thank you for serving and thank you for your input today, even because past chairs are very, very important. You used to fly an airplane, didn't you? Is that part of what you used to do as well?
Yes, I've been a pilot since 2011. December 23rd, I think, 2011, or 24th. Wow. I think maybe it was Christmas Eve. I got my
you didn't hit
license.
Santa out there.
Yeah. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun to be a pilot. I had my own plane for a number of years. I had a plane the year I was the president or chair of the Chamber of Commerce, and I was on the cover of the Chambers magazine with my airplane that year.
Oh, that's cool.
And I think it was great having the plane. I used to have several offices, and I'd use the plane to fly to the different offices. But one of the most memorable or most proud things I'm proud of as a pilot was during the hurricane in Puerto Rico, Hurricane Maria. I had an opportunity to fly, not my plane, but a friend of mine's plane, which was much bigger, along with his pilot. His professional pilot was the pilot. I was a co-pilot. But we flew to Puerto Rico, and the chamber actually helped in that event. We put the word out through the chamber that we were going to be flying down there, and we were able to gather a whole bunch of supplies to take to Puerto Rico. So we had adult diapers, which is actually in a hurricane, that's a big thing, that shortage of. So we needed to try to find relatively light things to carry in the plane. So we got a bunch of those. People were just showing up at my house. We put it out through the chamber, and people were showing up at my house bringing stuff to me. And then people showed up the day we left at the airport, at Fullerton Airport right here, with all the supplies. So we loaded up the plane, flew to Puerto Rico, dropped all that stuff off. We picked up more stuff actually in Florida, then flew over to Puerto Rico, dropped all that supplies off, the food, and then we picked up a young family that had an 18-month-old baby and their 2 dogs, which really started it all. This lady, I was speaking somewhere, and this lady came out to, she goes, "You don't know me, but I know you help people. And my 18-month-old granddaughter is stuck in Puerto Rico." This was 2 days after the hurricane. "And can you help get them out?" And I was like, "I have no idea how I'm going to help you." And I tried to arrange a couple of flights for them. But the big problem after the hurricane was we couldn't communicate. There was no phones.
Okay.
And so we were struggling with that. And this mother, she reaches out to me and says, "Yeah, okay, my son and his wife and his daughter and the dogs, we got a hold of them. When do they need to be at the airport?" And I had actually arranged 2 planes to go get them. But those planes had already left. And I was distraught. I was like, she sent me the text, and I wanted to, I didn't even know how to answer it. I was kind of deflated.
Sure.
And we were with some friends, and we sat down to dinner. The other couple, the husband, was a pastor, and he is still part of the religion faculty at Vanguard University. And he says this prayer for our food, but he also prays for the people in Puerto Rico and the victims of the hurricane. And almost as he says amen, my phone rings. And it's my very good friend, John Manley. He's a great lawyer, very successful. Normally I wouldn't have answered the phone, but I saw who it was, and I don't get a chance to talk to him. He's usually very busy, but I pick up the phone. I say, "Excuse me," and I pick up the phone, and he says, "Marty, we should be flying our planes down to Puerto Rico and getting people out of there. Out of the blue.
Wow.
And so he loaned me his big plane, his professional pilot, his credit card to buy fuel.
Shoot.
And we flew down there and brought people. And we were able to bring people that needed to come all the way back to California. So we brought people all the way back to California. We also brought a couple that had dementia out, and a Vietnam veteran and his son back. And it was a lot worse than the news had reported.
Right.
That kind of came out later, that the news was kind of underreporting how bad it was. And that threw me, because what I saw was so much worse than what I was hearing in the news. But that mother was filtering water through a T-shirt to try to purify. That was the only filtration that she had for her 18-month-old daughter to stay hydrated. And the Vietnam vet and his son helped bury a neighbor who died in the hurricane.
Wow.
The hangars and the buildings at the airport were just
gone,
demolished. It was pretty incredible. I really kind of realized how powerful that hurricane was and the damage that it did.
Literally got the call there straight. Yeah. That's, power of the Lord, right? That's what people say.
Yeah.
Look at that.
It was really a God thing, I think.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Wow, that's a good story. We should have led with that. That's what we should have started off. People would probably still be listening now. We'd have started
long
with
gone,
that one.
20 minutes ago.
They've gone 20 minutes, yeah, elated.
They missed the best part.
Yeah, they did. Oh, that's really good. Oh, that's why watch it till the end. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know what to do that. That's good. Well, thank you for coming on, Marty. Just before people leave, though, I always ask if they've got any final type of things, whether it's something we missed or we touched on they didn't talk enough about. So are there any thoughts or things that you'd like to just share just before we finish our podcast today?
I think what I want to say is, as far as the chamber goes, if you're involved in the chamber, you'll get a lot more out of it. So don't just pay your dues. Keep paying your dues no matter what. But
please, keeps the lights on. But
also get active and get involved in the chamber as much as you can, and you'll get a lot more out of it. I also would like to add, don't get legal advice from your real estate agent, your bartender, your hairdresser. Get legal advice from a lawyer, and really a lawyer that specializes in whatever your question is. Right. If you're getting divorced, talk to a divorce lawyer. If you're forming a new business partnership, talk to a business lawyer. And if you're doing estate planning, talk to an estate planning. And if it's an elder, you're dealing with an elder law attorney. But don't take for granted that you had similar questions when you were dealing with your grandfather, so you think all those things apply now. The law changes all the time. The law changed significantly just 3 weeks ago. January 1, 2024, the rules for Medi-Cal changed. And we could do a whole nother show on those new rules for Medi-Cal, because if somebody is dealing with a senior who's sick and maybe going into a nursing home, 3 weeks ago they didn't qualify for Medi-Cal benefits. Today they do.
Really?
So significant changes. And California is the only state that has these rules. If you look up stuff online, you're going to get a bunch of misinformation that doesn't apply in California, that's old and out of date. You really want to have the most up-to-date information. And really, California is the best state in the country to be in if you're dealing with an older parent or grandparent.
Well, there you go. Well, that's a great plug for maybe the next show about elder law. That's a good one. Thank you. Well, Marty, thank you very much for coming on. Really appreciate it. I really appreciate learning more about you today, and hopefully all the audience will.
I have a question for you, Andrew. Don't you do something Monday mornings that we could get some people to come?
I was just about to plug that. So for those of you who may be listening who are a current serving member, whether actually it's military, or Coast Guard, and of course maybe Coast Guard, or even a firefighter or a police officer. We meet Monday mornings at the Fullerton Korean War Memorial, just off Harbour Boulevard there. Harbour and Brea, right? Marty and myself started this meet and greet type thing nearly a year ago, I think it is right now. After Marty sharing a really lovely story at the Rotary, about a friend of his who'd passed away. And so we just meet, chit-chat, coffee. Sometimes we have bagels, donuts, and bits and pieces. Yeah, burritos the other day. I missed that.
Delicious burritos.
Missed that. And it's for all ages. Doesn't matter. We've got some. We did have one World War II.
One World War II,
right?
but pretty regularly we get some Korean War vets, Vietnam veterans.
Yeah. So if you're out there,
and younger vets too, Matt and Robert are both War on Terror.
That's true. That's true. That's true. And so we meet there Monday morning, 9:00, except holidays. And you'll see signs throughout Fullerton. You'll see like some soldiers saluting somebody. And I forgot what was the sign say on it, Marty. Is it something?
I think it says veterans meeting 9:30
Mondays or something.
But we actually meet at 9.
But we actually meet at 9. There you go. So that was that plug there. See, that should have been in your last things to say, Marty. Anyway, thank you very much.
You do it so much better.
All right. Well, thank you very much, listeners. Really appreciate it. Thank you for listening to Chamber Talk with Marty Burbank.